Thanks for staying with us. The Employment and Labour Minister, Thulas Nxesi, has announced that his department has launched a skills training and entrepreneurship program, which is aimed at tackling the issue of unemployment in the country. This program will afford the UIF beneficiaries and unemployed young people an opportunity to be integrated into the labour market, or in some cases, start their own businesses. So, with the soaring number of young people without jobs, does this help at all when it comes to the unemployment crisis that South Africa is currently facing? Let's speak to Kristal Duncan-Williams, Youth Capital Employment and Project Lead. Kristal, thank you so much for your time this evening. I mean, as elections are approaching, unemployment is still one of the big issues. I mean, it remains a national crisis. So what do you make of this latest initiative by the Department of Employment and Labour? Does it help?
I think at the scale of the problem, over 9 million young people not in employment, education or training. Any intervention, we should first be happy that something's being done, but then we need to interrogate. There's been many interventions by the government over the years. Youth Capital's been around for 6 years, and we've seen many programs launched in that time. And obviously the idea of skilling young people and integrating them into the labour market is a good one. What we need to see is better coordination between government departments on this issue, and better coordination between government and the private sector if we really want to see young people pathway out of these interventions, which are often short-term or just a skills training-based intervention, into real employment opportunities.
And when we talk about, as you say, the interrogation of these particular programs and whether or not at the same time they are effective, but also, as you say, a much more better coordination. But when you look at them, some of these various initiatives, do they respond to some of the underlying challenges that are faced by young people, particularly those who are unemployed?
So the lab program that was launched is interesting because, it makes specific mention of using SETAs to skill young people. Now, while on paper that sounds great because we need young people to have artisanal and vocational skills, and SETAs are the institution through which to do that. However, we know from speaking to businesses that SETAs are very dysfunctional. Some work well, but there are many that are inefficient in accrediting training facilities, or inefficient in giving young people the certification to prove that they've completed training and their apprenticeship learning. And so the SETAs as they stand need an overhaul. And what we often have seen in the past is, we speak about demand-led training, but really this training has been led by the government. And many people work in these institutions who aren't in the private sector and don't know what these particular industry needs. And so what we're calling for here is an overhaul of the SETA system. There needs to be industry-led conversations about what skills are relevant, which are not relevant anymore in 2024, what practical training is really required, and what it takes to make a skilled artisan. And the best people to have those conversations with are industries. We need industry bodies to be leading these training initiatives, with SETAs playing an important administrative and supportive and oversight role. And we really need some kind of report, an audit of SETAs and their efficiency. And for, all the money that gets spent through the Skills Fund, how many fully qualified apprentices do we get out at the end of that pipeline? And these are some of the questions we have about these kinds of programs.
And another question, that one could also have is what we often hear about, and that is how the SMMEs are the backbone of the economy. They're important. They're supposed to then be supported. And you think about these young people, for example, who then get the skills, who get the certificates, but then you think about the lack of job opportunities for them to then be able to place in them. So how critical would the support for SMMEs be here in order to make sure that this particular aspect of the economy we get right?
SMMEs are critical. It's why we at Youth Capital are pushing for an agenda, ahead of elections and into the new administrative term that looks at public employment programs, demand-led skilling, which I've spoken about now, and SMMEs. We need supportive environments to make SMMEs. We know that they're creating jobs, even in very adverse conditions, macroeconomic conditions of low electricity, low economic growth, but then also just practically with not having HR and various training abilities to take on young, inexperienced young people. And so if we look at these three pipelines, public employment programs providing young people with necessary first work experience, programs and interventions like LAP providing upskilling that's actually needed by the market, and then a supportive environment for SMMEs, making them the engine of the economy, allowing them to absorb young people who have a little bit of work experience through short-term and public employment programs, have some of the soft skills that SMMEs need but are not in a position to provide to young, inexperienced workers. And if we start thinking about a pipeline like this, then we can really start thinking about how to address all the young people who are locked out of the labor market because of a lack of work experience, because of a lack of soft skills, because of a lack of access to social connections that tells them, where these opportunities are.
And when you look at, the issue of unemployment in just the last decade alone, and we see some concerning numbers, coming out there, but would you say that given some of the initiatives that have been put in place, are we anywhere near turning the corner?
I think there's some light at the end of the tunnel. If we look at things like the Basic Education Employment Initiative and Social Employment Fund, National Youth Service, if you add all those numbers together, we're seeing hundreds of thousands of young people over the course of the last 3 years get that first work experience. Where we are falling short is making that work experience count for a next step, a next opportunity. And that's really where this coordination comes in. Through those programs, we've seen different departments work within the government with each other. What we still are lacking is that coordination with the private sector, and particularly SMMEs, the small and medium business owners. There's often conversations with big firms, but small and medium businesses get left out of the conversation. So I think there is some light at the end of the tunnel, but we need to galvanize it. We need to build momentum on these programs, looking at the entire pipeline of young people through their journey to economic productivity, whatever that might look like for them.
All right, Kristal, thank you so much for your time this evening. I appreciate it. Let's see then, just how much of a dent this does make on the unemployment numbers, but also as you talk about this issue of the SETAs and the skilling of young people, and, just the auditing that needs to be done there to ensure that these are in fact effective. So we'll continue to follow this conversation. Thank you so much for getting us started. That is Kristal Duncan-Williams, Youth Capital Employment and Project Lead.